After the President and Prime Minister's houses were stormed at the weekend, today it was the Prime Minister's office. Police either unwilling or unable to stop people entering the compound any way they can. Inside, alongside compliant riot police, cheering the overthrow of the family who've dominated Sri Lanka for so long. Security forces eventually attempted to gas protesters out of the area. He said the Prime Minister has no right to become president. He must honour the people's wishes and resign immediately. Others insisted both Prime Minister and President must go.
Yes, I definitely want both resign, and I think a new regime needs to come into place, and I think Sri Lanka still has hope.
In a change to the advertised schedule, protesters took over the national TV news studio, replacing planned coverage with their own message, complete with signing. He said the station was biased and should broadcast more of the protests before the station went off air.
Here's a big breaking coming in from Sri Lanka. Protesters now barging into the television's office and shutting down operations.
It began broadcasting again later. Across town, occupied by protesters for 5 days now, the presidential office and palace have become revolutionary theme parks. People queue up politely to get in. Inside the presidential bed, not looking too happy, the bedroom cupboards long since ransacked. He said the whole country wants the president gone. Another man said people at last can see now where their taxes went on luxurious lifestyles. And what of the fugitive president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa? The Rajapaksa family dynasty, for so long with an iron grip on this island, has ended in fiasco. A president unable to run the country, for days unable to run away from it. Multiple failed attempts to get out by plane or by naval vessel. He and his entourage have fled to the Maldives, where protests have started as a result. It seems he's heading to the Gulf, long-time haven for the well-heeled on the run from justice. In the past 2 hours, the fugitive president has appointed the Prime Minister, Ranil Wickremesinghe, as president. He's calling the protesters fascists. He said the security forces have advised me to declare a state of emergency and curfew, so I'm doing that. We must defeat, he said, this fascist threat. All of this likely only to inflame anger on the streets. The Prime Minister, now President, seen as part of the economic problem in Sri Lanka by so many, not the solution. Leaving Sri Lankans, of course, queuing for fuel, for food, for everything. Supplies desperately low, prices painfully high. Inflation could soon hit 70%. Put it this way, the emergency government said today it can't hold elections for the time being because it hasn't got any money to pay for them. Democracy, like everything else in Sri Lanka, unaffordable, unavailable.
A little earlier, I spoke to Louis Ganeshadasan. He's a constitutional lawyer and consultant at the Centre for Policy Alternatives in Sri Lanka. I began by asking him if he was worried about the violence breaking out.
I mean, it's so fluid right now, it's very difficult to say. But what has happened today is basically one of the worst case scenarios that could have happened. There has been an escalation, especially a miscalculation by the Prime Minister's office when they announced prematurely that in the morning that a state of emergency had been declared once the president had left, when the speaker very clearly said an acting appointment had not been made. So it felt like the Prime Minister was arrogating power to himself that he did not have. This was, of course, subsequently clarified, but most of the damage had been done by that time. The Prime Minister is using the protests to say that there are anarchist forces who want to overthrow the constitutional state and is justifying action taken by him. So what you have is this kind of two independent, self-fulfilling prophecies which are at odds with each other. And there is a fear, at least on my part, that could lead to violence, and I really hope it doesn't. And there is an urgent need to de-escalate the situation in Sri Lanka. The Prime Minister and those in government need to come out with a clear timeline for when President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's resignation will be in force and what happens thereafter. This is critically important.
Of course, this political crisis is coming in the midst of an economic crisis. How difficult has it become to obtain basics like food and fuel for people?
Fuel is virtually impossible to come by. People are in fuel queues for 3-4 days. I've given up on the idea. I basically go everywhere on a bicycle now. We've not been able to go into regular work to Colombo over the last week at least, because public transport has been stretched thin. There are reports of people virtually dying in houses because there is no fuel to even ferry sick people to hospitals. So the economic situation has become much worse. And for us to get out of this situation, regardless of who takes over government, there is an urgent need to procure enough fuel stocks to keep the country running and to keep electricity running, because if not, our economy is just going to go into a free fall, and that's just going to create much more cycles of violence. But underpinning all of this, the political crisis and economic crisis, is a crisis of faith in government, or lack of faith amongst the population about the legitimacy of government institutions, particularly because of the repeated misstatements and outright lies the government had said from February, March this year, when they repeatedly denied the existence of a problem, when people could see that there was a problem. And this in turn has created a situation where people don't trust information coming from the government. And that is a very dangerous situation.
How anxious do you feel about the state of your country right now?
On a scale of 1 to 10, about a 78.
It's that bad?
It's really bad, mostly because of the uncertainty that there is around. It feels like, and I might not understand the situation that well because I'm living through the situation right now, so I might lack that perspective. But it most certainly feels like we are on a precipice right now. And one wrong move here or there, or one ill-advised decision could push us over. And this is why it's critically important for those in power and also those who have legitimacy amongst the different protest groups to act with extreme caution and restraint. Because at the end of the day, those who will suffer under violence will be the poorest and most marginalized groups in this country.
Louis Ganeshadasan, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.